Back in the saddle. All right. We're in it. Been a couple of weeks. And I mean, a lot has happened. We had the Metta Performance Summit, which I was sad to have missed you, but it was, overall a great summit. I wanted to share one quick thing on it. And then I wanted to because we were talking just before recording about something you were starting to do. But at Metta this time, for the first time, I saw them really advocate for using outside measurement platforms in a big way. They gave Northbeam a shout out. They gave House a shout out. They gave everybody a shout out. And so they're pushing really hard. And so obviously it made me think of you, and that's why I was like, dude, don't tell me anything before we hit record. Yeah. So I'm going to push it to you because you started to use a bunch of these tools to triangulate. And so I'm curious to get your perspective on what's been going on there for you.
Yeah. And it's going to segue into another topic as well, actually. So we've been using Triple Whale for a good chunk of the business. And at first, Triple Whale for us was less of an attribution tool and just more of I needed a central place where I could look at my entire business, and Triple Whale really delivered on that. And then at a certain point, there was this sort of inflection where I needed to reward the ads that were getting people in through the front door. And so Triple Whale became this sort of mechanism for me to use first click attribution and allocate spend towards the assets that were, again, driving that sort of first touch. Then we onboarded Prescient AI. Prussian AI was a media mix model. And there were a lot of questions around forecasting, what is the ceiling? What's the saturation? A ton of these questions that then I needed a media mix model to help bring on. And then most recently, we've got these questions around, okay, we want to do some meaningful stuff with television and other activities. And then that's where we've recently onboarded House. And so we've now got the Thanos ring of measurement with an analytics tool that has MTA, multi-touch attribution. We have our media mix model with Prescient, and we have House, our match market testing and experimentation partner. And so it's great because I now have a tool to answer different questions. We most recently ran an experiment, and I unfortunately can't dive too in the weeds with the results of the experiment because it's actually it's pretty compelling data.
Pretty nice finding. You can't
great finding. Look, so I went into this with a thesis that.
So let me ask you a different question, so that way we don't have to touch something that's not particularly interesting. So this was an incrementality test that you ran through House, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. So my first question is, when you run studies with House, Triple Whale and Prescient are kind of product-driven products. So you just plug it in and you kind of get what you get, and you have to it's your job to understand the data. Is House similar in that regard, or does House help you design and help you interpret the results that you're getting?
They help, and then yes, they help on all fronts. So I would say they're a bit more of a service company, and Olivia Corey, incredible, just brilliant. I got a taste of her brilliance over Slack where we got the results. Even she was surprised by these results, and then started asking these questions and sort of building thesis and hypothesis around why the results were the way they were, and really thought provoking. And they lean in to help you kind of interpret that data, because in isolation it's okay, these are the results, but what do we do with it? They all provide action and sort of build an action outside of those results as well.
That's what I was going to say. So my suspicion, and you had shared a little bit of this when you came to I don't want to put too much of a plug, but when you came to our offsite, you were like, hey, the tools that have services as well, in addition to just the tool, you end up getting a lot more value out of, right? And so when you were thinking about the ways in which you can take advantage of these incrementality tests, I'm assuming that was a big part of the value, and you're just oh my God, these learnings that I'm getting, yes, of course, it's part the measurement, but it's part the skill of being able to do it effectively is also. So now the reason I'm asking it in this way is, let's just say you're someone who like can't work with house for whatever reason. So you don't have the budget to, or whatever it is. How would you think, given this framing, about what someone should do? Should they not particularly choose to work with house in order to get the level of insight and action that you got out of these first tests that you're now doing with them?
I mean, it's never going to be as perfect as like working with a house, but in what you're doing with these experimentation tools or like house, for example, what you're really doing is just testing your media against a market that isn't getting your media. And so one clear way of doing that is just literally turning off the media. And it's like, okay, we're running with Google ads, or we're running with Meta, and we are generating this much revenue, this much profit. This is our aimer. When we turn off Meta ads for 2-3 weeks, what happens? Do you see less revenue coming in now, or do you see better efficiency? At the end of the day, there's a sort of a cause and effect, and so you just turn it all off. The biggest thing to keep in mind, though, is it needs to be over a longer period, like a considerable period of time, because these platforms sometimes have a halo effect. So like turning Meta ads off for 3 days or over the weekend is not going to tell you anything, because the ads that people saw on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are still working. So you have to give yourself about 2 to 3 weeks before you can actually turn them off. That's one path. The other path is attempting to replicate what House has done. And it's very much like, go get yourself a data scientist or a data engineer and have them analyze all of your store sales data by state or city, and then have them bucket or create markets, if you will, that are consistent. And if you can get this analyst to find markets that behave the exact same, they move up and down, their discounting's the same, return rate's the same, all the metrics that matter to you are the exact same. As long as they're really similar markets, then you've basically done what House has done, what House does. The only thing that you're missing now is that support and that like service of interpretation, design, and setup. And there's like back and forth. I consider myself on the sort of more advanced side of measurement. And even then, as we were designing the experiment, they would jump in and be like, well, you may want to give yourself another week on that one. It should be 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks, or let's extend the observation window. Or, hey, Brian, if you, do a 40% holdout instead of a 30% holdout, you'll have this much power. So like, there's still a lot more value to be had there and not doing this on installation. But if you don't have that support, you can definitely do some semblance of it in-house to give you guidance. And it won't be perfect, but you'll know what to do directionally.
Yeah. All right. So now that you got all 3 rings, what is a power that you now have that you did not previously have?
Oh, man. Okay. So one, I have now been able to set up a proxy and give better guidance and sort of direction to my Google media buyer, right? So I've been able to say, hey, look, I want you to scale up to the moon until the ROAS and triple whale is this number. And so now we have that.
Wow.
We have this triple whale data that is basically like a proxy for the experimentation results that we can use on a day-to-day basis. Now we can use it like on today's performance, for example. So that's number one. The second thing that we did is I took a look at the media mix model itself, and I compared the incrementality results, the experiment results, with what the media mix model readout said. And they actually matched. There was like, about a 98% match between the two numbers. And so now I could go back and look at the media mix model and say, okay, now that you're kind of, you're accurate, you seem to be accurate. What happens if I double, triple, quadruple spend here? And now I can start to see the saturation curve for the MMM. And what we're going to do is we're going to scale up. We're going to run another experiment, right? And then we're going to compare if the results from the experiment line up again with the sort of the scale test for the media mix model. Basically, the media mix model said, if you scale up to this amount, your ROAS is going to be this number. And so we're going to see if that happens. And then we're going to basically use that as sort of like a flywheel of continuing to scale up to then validate the results from what the MMM is saying with the experimentation. And then, use that to make sure that we're not leaving money on the table. So That's what's happening right now actively is we're like scaling up this activation that I in other circumstances without house I would have never scaled up. I actually was attempting to cut it. So, really shocking findings that now I hope to further validate. I think the learning here is that, these things unfortunately need to continually be like tested. So what you're doing with these measurement partners is like, you've got a thesis, you've got like a hunch, a gut feeling, if you will. You go and test it. And then that test gives you a semblance of the direction, but you don't know how far in that direction you should walk. You just know that you should walk in that direction. So the next layer of testing for us is to then confirm, like, how many steps should I take? Should I only take 500 steps forward? Or is it really just like 10 steps or 50 steps? So that's that next phase of testing. And then from there, it's like, great, next hypothesis, next hunch, we'll test that, validate it, see how far we need to go. And then that starts to then optimize over time of doing these experiments. We'll be able to really optimize all of our ad spend and make sure that there's minimal to no waste, as well as identifying the opportunity.
That's super wild.
Yeah, that's why I got excited about this experiment, because it's like, man, like
How did you come up with the experiment? Or let's just take a step back. Mm-hmm. What made you decide from cutting it to deciding to test it? And then, like, what is your psychology when you see a test give you a result that was different from your instinct? Do you just say, like, is your psychology to be like, oh, turns out I was wrong? Or is your psychology to be like, I don't really trust this result, let me double check it? Or is it like, hey, I guess I was wrong, good thing I tested it? Like, where are you on that spectrum of like a result different from your instinct? Yeah.
So how we landed on this result, the way I'm approaching my house experiments is I'm running 2 tests at the same time. One test is a cost-cutting exercise, and the other test is a incrementality exercise, an awareness exercise. So we were running these 2 tests simultaneously across 2 separate channels. My awareness play didn't work at all. And in my cost-cutting exercise, it was just kind of like, okay, where do I feel like I'm spending too much money that I don't think is incremental to the business? And so what would happen if I cut that spend down? Or like, just in general, what is the effect of that spend in the market? And cutting it down, quote unquote, is turning it off in 40% of the country. And so that's what that experiment was. It was, okay, we're going to just completely turn this off entirely on 40% of the country, and see what happens to that 40% versus the other percent. And that sort of approach of like cost cutting and awareness play at the same time, running in parallel, it's going to give you 2 sides of wins. One is going to be, you're either going to find areas that you can cut, and then you'll find an area that you can ideally move that money to, right? And then optimize your spend. And then like you get a double whammy. You've protected your bottom line, and at the same time, you now have a new channel that's generating more revenue to not just sort of protect the bottom line by spending less, but now actually grow the bottom line because you're generating more revenue at the top line that's efficient. So that's been the approach.
How does this make you? Sorry. Answer the psychology question, and then I also want to know, how does this make you think about attribution differently? Because presumably what was happening is your instinct was built off of data that you were seeing in attribution, right?
Yeah. As for the sort of like, how did I reconcile these results? So there's always, you just have to be a skeptic. And so I immediately went to look at triple well in-house, and I said, okay, is there agreement here, or is this something that like there's complete disagreement? And what I saw was that in the MMM, there was agreement. And in triple well, there was also agreement depending on the attribution window that you were looking at. So disagreement on the last click perspective, disagreement on a platform touch perspective, which is like how Google measures, disagreement on linear or like linear all, where it's dividing the credit up amongst everything. And then there was agreement in first click. And so when I saw that agreement in first click and I saw the MMM agree, I kind of walked away with like, okay, I trust the results. Like, I wasn't looking for a reason to doubt the results per se, but my curiosity sort of guided me to understand how can I use these results so that they're not in a vacuum, knowing that this was a snapshot in time. So like, how can I use this moving forward? How can I use this next year even?
Yeah.
That's a bit of a hopes and dreams there. All the measurement purists will say like, no, you run this, it's a snapshot, maybe you run it for this quarter, but like next quarter you should rerun the experiment because things may change. Your marketing mix may change, competition may change, the level of awareness in the market and maturation of the market will change, et cetera, et cetera. So all I did was take the results. I don't think like I was shooken up about them. I made them make sense. And then I looked to apply them, overall, be able to look for opportunities to apply them into the future. And then the questions that Olivia asked were very thought provoking to then like understand the why behind these results, when my experience and my gut was saying, look, these results shouldn't have been the way they were. When I like walked through this sort of thought exercise with her, it made me realize that factors in the market do change. And so to your second question about like, how does this make you think about attribution? It's really interesting. I think that these results would have been different a year ago versus now, but the level of awareness that this category that I'm in and the competition and sort of the investment levels, like, Braun is a big competitor of mine. Braun has been investing more and they're generating now more awareness into the market. And so it's no longer just us. It's now other brands that are coming forward and generating sizable investment in capital. And it's changing the landscape. It's changing the way that these consumers think about the product and service that I'm selling. And so I think that like when we think about attribution, it's ever changing, and this is maybe a pitfall that brands need to be sort of mindful of. When you're scaling and growing and like you're sort of a new category, a new product, how you look at attribution, how you think about what is the right attribution setting or the right tool to use for attribution may change entirely as you continue to grow, as you go retail, as you develop an omnichannel presence, as maybe your offer and price point changes because you're attracting a different consumer, as the market in general becomes more mature, or you've saturated certain channels and like, you can't generate that awareness to capture in the same channel. And you now have to look for generating awareness in other areas. I think all of these are factors that then change and then reset how we look at attribution. And so that's been my biggest takeaway is like, okay, the way that I've built the business and have driven the revenue growth that we've driven to date needs to be audited and reassessed, because there have been new changes this year, even from a retail presence, for example, that weren't factors in previous years. And now I have to be more mindful of how these things all influence and change and disrupt the status quo. So attribution, I think, is an ever-changing thing, not just between brands, but even within the brand itself as the brand continues to grow and mature.
I got it. One of the things you said that I want to quickly double click on before we wrap for today is you were talking about like other competitors are building awareness and switching your strategy. I know like you guys used to run a lot of content around what IPL is, and your PDPs talk about what IPL is, and your website talks about what IPL, like everything talks about what IPL is in order to drive interest relative largely to shaving, basically, right? So it was like competing with shaving, essentially. And so I guess, how do you think about moving from awareness gen to capture on Meta? Yeah. And what are some like specific strategies that you guys have started to think about for people who are like, in their businesses going from awareness to compete?
Yeah, it's really, I think like I'm still doing some more thought process. I'm doing some more thinking around how this influences different categories, right? But take subscription boxes, for example. At the sort of beginning stages, I think the subscription model, subscription boxes were able to really lean on Meta as a way to generate the demand that they were looking for and at the same time capture that demand. But as more and more subscription boxes came into the market, the sort of the novelty of a subscription box kind of went away.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's doing subscription, and it's like, and so there's sort of this inflection point where the market matures so much, and I'm still thinking about how do you define maturation? Is it just general awareness? Is it a share of voice thing? Is it search volume from Google, or is it a function of impressions versus divided by the addressable market on Meta, or is it a function of revenue, or is it a function of just ad spend in general? So I'm still thinking about like how do you define that maturation, but whatever that number, whatever that KPI is, whenever there's a certain maturation, I believe that you kind of have to seek awareness, driving awareness through other mechanisms. And then your strategy on Meta shifts from this sort of like forward leaning, awareness driving, high spend, high creative testing velocity approach to generate awareness. And it sort of recedes back to more of a demand capture where you're very tactical about the types of creatives, the types of offers, where you're putting that traffic, and you're using mediums like influencers or TV or even your retail presence to then generate the demand itself and generate awareness itself to create differentiation in the ad auction. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it now. It's kind of like, okay, does it make sense to just like continue scaling up on Meta? And I think that the ceilings are different for every brand. So I do want to say that because there are some brands that will be like, well, Brian, we're spending 7 million and I can still spend more. Right? I was talking to a buddy of mine who you know very well, and 7 million a month, clothing brand, 7 million a month. I'm like, okay, well that makes sense though, because you're not just
people
selling.
People buy a lot of clothes. Yeah.
Well, that and like each of your SKUs or categories are in a way a different line of business, right? Like, you're selling in market for people that want cashmere sweaters and cashmere polos and pants. Those are 3 separate customers potentially. So your ceiling is a lot higher. Maybe you can spend $7 million a month, but there's going to be a point where like that brand can no longer spend that much money, or they're doing it not as efficient, not as profitable, because they're no longer just generating awareness, and they could benefit from pulling that spend back. And so it's a road that we're sort of looking to cross right now. We're sizing up what are the other opportunities, such as co-brand, bigger partnerships, influencers. Where's the attention? And so that's kind of where we're starting first, is like, what is driving the attention? Where are people putting their focus? And then based off of that, kind of building a strategy around it. I think the sort of the magical thing that we're exploring is leveraging the awareness that other brands have built. Yeah. And then can we like hitch our wagon to them and just continue to like climb up using their awareness and market.
That's awesome, man. All right. Well, guys, this one was an amazing one because of the holy trinity.
We did it.
Of incrementality, MMM, and attribution, and then talking about like switching strategies on Meta. But I feel like we're going to be hearing a little bit more about which measurement type you use for what types of insights over time. And so this is going to be a fun one to dial into. All right, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.